Thank you, Aaron, for that very nice introduction. It's an honor to be here to speak with you today. We are running late, so I'm going to kind of speed things along here. Just by way of introduction, I am Tom Bevan. I'm the co-founder and president of Real Clear Politics. It's a website that we started 22 years ago. Founded with a friend of mine. We were both political junkies, and we wanted to track politics, political news, and information. And so we are a clearinghouse for U.S. elections, U.S. policy, and U.S. politics. And if you come to our site, all the information I'm going to show you today is available on our site, realclearpolitics.com. So that is what we aim to do. So 47 days from today, American voters are going to go to the polls and make their choice as to who will control the balance of power in the U.S. Congress. A lot of people always say that this is the most important election of their lifetimes. There's a feeling in the country, though, this time that it may actually be true, and here's the reason why. So what I'm going to do is I've got about 2 dozen slides showing various information, but where I want to start is the backdrop to this election, where things are right now, how the public is feeling, what they're focused on, before we go into the actual battle for control. And I'll finish by talking about 2024, because that race officially starts the day after Election Day, but has unofficially already begun. So here we go. We are undoubtedly a nation, the U.S. is a nation at political war. This is something that's been going on for a long, long time, but seems to have gotten worse just in the last few years. Pew Research has done some great work in this regard, and they just produced a report a couple of months ago, and showing, as you can see here, the rising partisan antipathy that's been going on in the U.S. And you can look all the way back. They started tracking this in 1994. You can see now Republicans, their very unfavorable view of the Democratic Party went from 21 to 62%, so it basically tripled over the course of those 26 years. Same thing for Democrats, from 17% to 54%. Democrats have a very unfavorable view of the Republican Party. And it's not just the parties themselves. We now tend to view members of the other party in the United States in increasingly unfavorable ways. And you can see again from this Pew study that was done in June and July of this year, Republicans now say that Democrats are more closed-minded, dishonest, immoral, unintelligent, and lazy. And Democrats say the exact same thing about Republicans. And you can see in this bottom right, the number of people who say 4 or more of those traits apply to the other party has gone from 30 to 53% for Republicans and 22 to 43%. So it's not just that members we view members of the opposite party as just being wrong in their choices. We view them now as immoral, and it's actually even worse than that. This is from a CBS News poll that came out earlier this year. When you think about Republicans, you tend to think of them as A, political opposition, that is, if they win, you just don't get the policies you want, or B, enemies, that is, if they win, your life and your entire way of life may be threatened. 58% of Republicans, 58% of Democrats said that they view Republicans as enemies that are a threat to their way of life. And conversely, 56% of Republicans said the same thing about Democrats. Those are frightening numbers. There is a lot of talk in the United States about, are we headed toward another civil war? I don't think that's the case. But the question is, how much worse does it have to get from here when 6 out of 10 of every member of one political party views the other political party as an existential threat to their way of life? And certainly, this is, again, these are trends that have been going on for decades, but with the advent of cable news in the mid-90s, with the advent of social media just in the last decade or so, it has been like adding fuel to the fire of our partisanship. And we are now further away from each other. Certainly, that is the discourse at the national level. I mean, and some people will probably feel this in their daily lives, even though it's not that extreme. But that's the way these campaigns are being run across the country. And that is the message from the political leadership in the United States. Joe Biden took office promising to be a uniter. He was going to work on behalf of everyone. And 14 months later, he waded directly into this with the speech that he gave in Philadelphia just a couple of weeks ago. And this was a high-risk political gambit, I think, on the part of the president and the Democrats. And here's why. This is from a Harvard-Harris poll that just came out last week. You can see Democrats were thrilled with it. They actually did think that Biden's speech was united and helped the country unite and move the country forward. 75% of Democrats thought that about the speech. Obviously, Republicans hated it, but look at the number of independents and others. Only 32% said it was united. 68% thought that it was a divisive speech and it would hold the country back. Now, clearly, in a midterm elections and in off-year elections, you absolutely have to motivate your base to turn out and vote. You cannot win without it. And that is certainly what Biden and the Democrats have been doing on the basis of the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade and sent it back to the states, making abortion a centerpiece of this election. But also with this, by saying essentially that portions, and as you know, there's been a lot of discussion, the president and the White House have been asked multiple times to clarify exactly what he was talking about in this speech. Was it just the leaders of the Republican Party? Was it everybody who voted for Trump? Who are these MAGA extremists that are semi-fascist? But clearly that's part of the gambit here. The problem is, in a midterm election, you have to have a motivated base, but you can't win without winning over moderates and independents. And so that's why I think this was such a high-risk strategy, because it absolutely did the motivating the base piece, but it was not well received by independent voters around the country. And so, for that reason, it was a high-risk thing to do. And obviously the administration is sticking with it, and they're doubling down on it. One of the metrics we track at Multi-lateral politics, and just as a quick reference point, one of the things, we were the inventor of the poll averages back in 2002. And all that means is really we take a bunch of polls that are in the field in a contemporaneous period of time and we average them together. It's a straight, simple average, and it's just a way of basically collating the data that's out there. In some of these horse race polls, it helps to, you'll get a poll saying one candidate's up 4 points, you get a poll the next day saying the other candidate's up 2 points. Well, who's right, where's the truth? It's usually somewhere in between. That's sort of the idea behind the poll average. We track the number of metrics at Multi-lateral politics. And this is one that we've been tracking for a long, long time. You can see, so this is the question that pollsters ask in a lot of surveys. Do you think the country's headed in the right direction or is it off on the wrong track? And you can see the public has generally been in a sour mood for a long, long time. When Barack Obama, if you go way back to 2009, there was a moment in time after Barack Obama was elected where they actually, the right direction and wrong track numbers reached a level of parity. They were each at 44.1% for about 3 days. And then went back to wrong direction being higher than right direction. But you can see, and if you go back actually even before this, before we started keeping an average on this, in 2008 during the Great Recession, the differential between the right direction and wrong track was over 70%. Right now you can see it's at about just under 40%. So still pretty negative. And you can see after this spike that took place in 2021, that was January 6th. I don't have my laser pointer here, but and then Joe Biden was inaugurated, and you can see the numbers got closer together, got down to about 45% right track, 50% wrong direction, and then things basically went south, but have recovered somewhat. All this really tells us, it gives us a sense of where the electorate, what their mood is, and they're not happy. And people can understand why. I mean, it's 8% on inflation, they're paying $3.50 to $4 a gallon for gas. And again, given how the parties think about each other, it is a pretty sour mood the electorate is in as they get ready to head to the polls in November. The other thing that's developed that's really interesting about this election in particular is something that I'm calling the partisan priority gap. Now, obviously parties have different priorities. Republicans tend to prioritize certain things over Democrats, but this election, it has become somewhat striking. In almost every single poll that's been taken for the last year, inflation, the economy, gas prices has been the #1 issue. That remains the case today. This is from NPR PBS Marist poll that just came out last week. A couple weeks ago, and you can see among national registered voters, 30% say that the inflation is #1. That goes up to 40% among Republicans, but even among independents, it's 37%. Democrats, however, view inflation as the third most important issue, behind abortion, behind the January 6th committee hearings, and behind health care at 16%. So Democrats are placing significantly less emphasis on inflation than certainly Republicans, but than independent voters. Here's another one from Quinnipiac, just sort of making the finer point. 27% overall say inflation is the #1 issue. Nothing else is even in double digits. Among Republicans, it goes up to 45. Among independents, it's 29. Among Democrats, abortion is #1 at 18. Then gun violence and climate change tied at 16. And then inflation tied with healthcare at 10. So you really do have, and I think, look, part of this is Democrats sort of in denial and not wanting to tell pollsters, yes, inflation is a big problem for the country, because obviously they know that's an issue that harms their party, is harming their president. So part of that is just an unwillingness to be truthful about the importance of inflation. But I think there is a certain degree of Democrats who don't think inflation is that bad, who do not believe that it is as much of an issue. And certainly the president has been, the White House's strategy on this, they've been trying to downplay it from the beginning. First he said it wasn't happening, that it was transitory, that it was Putin's fault. They've gone through multiple iterations to try and explain away inflation. And a certain amount of that, I think, has been absorbed by the base of the Democratic Party. The problem that represents for Democrats, though, is if they are not being seen by the electorate as being sufficiently engaged with the top priority of voters, they will be punished for that. If voters say, I care about how much my groceries and gas cost every day, and Democrats are out there talking about abortion and climate change, they're going to be seen as out of touch. And so again, I think this just is an interesting dynamic to this election, that we kind of have we have the parties speaking in two different languages about different issues, and we've certainly seen that be the case with the issue of abortion. It is one of the top issues among Democrats. It is one of the most motivating issues. It is now featured in all of the Democratic ads around the country, on the House level, the Senate level, and even some of these gubernatorial races, because it is an issue that is going to turn out Democratic voters, but also has the added effect of potentially scaring off independent voters who might otherwise vote Republican this election. So how are the parties seen by the public on an issue-by-issue basis? NBC News Wall Street Journal poll came out just earlier this week, and the Republican Party leads on 7 issues, and here they are. Border security, they're 36 points ahead of Democrats on that issue. Crime, Republicans plus 23. Economy, Republicans plus 19. Immigration plus 17. Cost of living, which is another way of saying inflation, plus 14. Protecting constitutional rights, plus 9. And being effective in getting things done, plus 6. But again, just think back to the slide I just showed you about what is on the minds of American voters. Republicans hold distinct advantages on the issues that voters are saying they care most about. Republican voters and independent voters. What about Democrats? They lead on 5 issues. Not surprisingly, abortion is the top issue. They have a 22-point lead over Republicans on that, 20-point lead on healthcare, 11 on education, 7 on protecting democracy, and 4 on uniting the country. So again, these are strong leads. These are issues that motivate Democratic voters, but there's not a lot of crossover between the priorities of the electorate. And so I think we're in a situation where Democrats are well positioned to motivate their base to turn out in November. The question is whether they're well positioned to reach across the spectrum and get some of those independent and moderate voters who, by the way, voted for them in the last 2 cycles. And I'm talking about suburbans, particularly suburban women who voted for Democrats in 2018 and 2020, have been drifting toward Republicans over the last 2 years. And this election has a lot of interesting cross currents. Democrats have made headway with those voters on the issue of abortion, but at the same time they've lost ground with them on the issue of crime and on the issue of education. So it's going to be, there are a number of cross currents in this election which I think make it inherently unpredictable. So this is President Biden's job approval rating. Traditionally, the president's job approval rating has been the single most effective metric for correlating to a final election outcome. Makes sense. If you think the president, the incumbent party is the guy at the top is doing a good job, you'll vote to re-elect members of that party. If you don't, then you'll vote for change. Traditionally, the number that people have looked at is 50%, right? If you've got 50% or better approval, you're in good shape. Anything below that, and you're in bad shape. I don't think that number actually applies anymore. Given how polarized we are as a society, Donald Trump, when he took office, he got 8% of Democratic votes. He had 8% Democratic approval for his entire time in office. Even when he did things that Democrats agreed with on trade or some of these other things, never got any credit for. It was always 8%. Joe Biden, despite being a guy who's sort of a middle of the roader, go along, get along, bipartisan guy in the Senate, same thing. He's got no approval from Republicans. There's nothing he can do to win their approval. And Democrats have stuck with him for the most part and come back to him recently. But again, so, I think the actual number is less than that. Biden doesn't have to be at 50% approval for Democrats to have a chance to win back the House. But he's got to be higher than where he is right now, 42.3%. That is still pretty low. But it is a lot better than where he was just a few weeks ago. On July 21st, in our Real Quick Politics average, you can see he hit his all-time low of 36.8%. And that's when Democrats across the country were absolutely just hitting the panic button left and right. Obviously, Democrats have had some successes. There was the Dobbs decision. They got some bills passed through Congress, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, which actually is sort of misnamed. But anyway, they've had some successes. And therefore, I think Biden's approval, he's had Democrats come home to him, improves his standing back up to 42%. Again, not great, but still much better than it was just a few weeks ago. But keep an eye on this number. You can see he's actually ticked down a little bit just in the past few days. We're getting a lot of data now. It's coming in. We're getting a lot of polls are being taken, particularly post Labor Day, and we'll be getting them now all the way through Election Day. So keep an eye on his job approval number. That is something that, to the extent it continues to go up, it's going to be good news for Democrats here in the home stretch. This is also, though, a bit of a problem for Democrats, because when you actually dig into Biden's approval rating, he has his overall approval rating, as I mentioned, 42.3, but on an issue-by-issue basis, not as good. These are Real Quick Politics average numbers, because most pollsters will ask not just how's the president doing, how's he doing overall, but how's he doing on these particular issues. And you can see on inflation, he's almost 10 points below his overall job approval rating. On immigration, 34.8, 36.7 on crime. People stopped asking about COVID. That was his one metric that he actually was above his overall job approval rating, was even above 50% for a while, his handling of the COVID issue. But COVID has now sort of dropped off the radar in terms of an issue for voters. So pollsters aren't even asking about his handling of COVID anymore. But you can see even on Ukraine, 41.5, he's under. So on all of these metrics, including the ones that voters are saying are most important to him, his approval rating is actually below his overall number. And so I think that's a real cause of concern for Democrats as well. So just to put where we are in some history, some context of history, obviously the first year midterm for any president is always an uphill battle, and you can see here, so this is the first year midterms going all the way back to Carter in 78. Again, first year, so Clinton 98 is not on there, George Bush, Obama 2014 is, 2014 is not on there, and George W. Bush 2006 is not on there. But as you can see, historically speaking, the in-party tends to lose about 28 seats in the House and almost 2 Senate seats. Obviously, you know, we're dealing with a number here of 2, 4, 6, 7, only 7 examples in history, recent history. And you can go back further than this, and the numbers don't change all that much. But I think given the sort of unique, polarized moment that we're in, even the last couple of elections are probably the most intuitive. Barack Obama's approval rating on election day in 2010 was 45%, and he lost 63 seats in the House and 6 Senate seats. Donald Trump's approval rating on election day in 2018 was 43.5%. So both were above where Joe Biden is now, and Republicans lost 40 seats there, but they did manage to pick up 2 seats in the Senate. Democrats, I think, are hoping for that kind of scenario this time around. And I'll get more into that in a second. But as you can see, just as a historical guide, Democrats were battling the odds to begin with, just based on history. And you add into the fact, highest inflation in 40 years, gas prices at, I think, $3.69, $3.75, something like that, as of today. And it makes for a really, really tough environment. So this is the generic congressional vote. This is the question that pollsters ask on almost all these surveys, and they say, if the election were held today, who would you vote for, the Republican or Democrat? No names attached. No names attached, just would you prefer Republicans or Democrats? And as you can see, the good news for Democrats is after trailing through most of the summer, they've made up ground and now taken a small lead. The bad news for Democrats is, A, this is a national number, and so Democrats, because they're kind of concentrated heavily in blue states and urban areas, they're not as equally distributed as Republicans. So when you think about a state like Arizona or Nevada, where some of these races are going to take place, their number is almost certainly lower there. So Democrats tend to they tend to underperform their generic ballot number. Republicans tend to overperform on election day. So, some good news, but I want to put this up here just to take a couple of other examples and look at the trends. So this is 2010. This was a great Republican year. It's the best Republican year they've had in the last, since 1994. And you can see here on this day, 12 years ago, Republicans had a 3-point lead in the generic ballot. And really, it broke early. It broke in July. Even before Labor Day, you could see it was going to be a great Republican year because they took a lead in the generic ballot and never relinquished it. And obviously, the final election result was they gained 63 seats, 63 House seats and 5 Senate seats. 2014 was another good Republican year, but as you can see, this was a little different. They were sort of bouncing along below Democrats through the summer. And really, the break didn't happen until Labor Day. Until they went into Labor Day with trailing, I think, Democrats by 1.4% in the generic ballot, and they came out of Labor Day and raced out to a 3.5-point lead, and again, rode that all the way to Election Day. So, again, that was an election that broke really late, but you can see, if you follow this metric, that Republicans, late deciders, were moving their way, and they were going to have a good night, and they did. They won 13 House seats and 8 Senate seats. It was a very, very favorable year in terms of the Senate. Now, here's the best Democratic recent year, which was 2018. And you can see, completely different dynamic here, completely different pattern. Democrats were ahead all the way through the summer, in fact, all the way back into 2017. There was never a hint that Republicans were getting even close to Democrats in the generic ballot. And of course, they went on to win 40 seats in the House, although they did lose 2 Senate seats, but nevertheless, totally different dynamic. If you go back and look at the one where we're at now, again, this looks more like a 2014 year, where, Democrats they're sort of bouncing around, 1 or 2 point lead. So keep an eye on this number, because this number is going to tell you which way the election is breaking as we get down in the final weeks. If you see, this was something actually that happened in 2016 that people did not notice. All of this stuff that Hillary Clinton was a lock to win that election. It was such a big surprise with Donald Trump. It really, if you looked at the generic ballot that year, go back and look at 2016. You'll see that Republicans in the final 2 or 3 weeks of that election surged in the generic ballot. There was evidence that something was going on, that people were moving toward Republicans. It's just that not a lot of the experts in the national media picked it up. So, so that's where things stand. And just real quickly to look at the House and the Senate, I know we're running short on time here. So Republicans only have to gain a net gain of 5 seats to take control. And this is why it's going to be so difficult. If you look at this map, so you can see we have up on top, Democrats have 184 seats, Republicans have 218 seats. 33 seats are toss-ups, okay, 33 seats. And of those 33, 27 of them are Democrats, are democratically held seats, right? Move over to the lean GOP column, okay? 12 of those seats in the lean GOP column are democratically held seats. And in the likely GOP column, 5 of those seats are democratically held seats. So, conversely, if you look, lean Dems, there's only 1 Republican seat that's leaning Dem. That's Texas 34. That's Meyer. Florida's a seat down in South Texas, and only one Republican seat that is considered a likely Dem pickup at this point. So you can see even if even if Democrats won all of these seats that are toss-up seats, if they won all 27 of those, and if they won all of the 12 that are currently already leaning Republican, they would still lose the House because of those 5 seats. They would really have to improve their standing dramatically from this point forward, even though they've improved it over the past few weeks to get to a point. I know some people are saying, oh, this is like 1998, and I think Democrats have a chance of keeping the House. Still not there yet. Now, it could happen in the final stretch if you see signs that the electorate, if Biden's approval rating keeps going up, if Democrats keep extending their lead in the generic ballot, then yes, we could be in a situation where Democrats have a great night, everything falls their way, and they manage to stave off losing the House. But the numbers still remain pretty daunting. So right now, our projection is the range of pickups is anywhere from 5 to 38 seats for the Republican Party, meaning they would either just take the House all the way up to the 40 seat gain. That's a pretty wide range. We like to keep things pretty wide because we're wary of making these kinds of predictions that other people are making. That there's a 92.7562% chance that this seat's going to go this way or that way. Politics is not that much of a science. Cannot be. I think that gives people a unfounded level of statistical certainty about things that simply does not exist. But anyway, average gain we still have at 21.5 seats. Again, historically the number is 28, so Democrats are doing, I think, a little bit better than they would based on historical context, but still they have a ways to go if they want to get that average gain number down. Battle for the Senate, and this is where a lot of the attention is being paid, a lot of the money is being spent, because obviously it's a 50-50 Senate. Democrats, GOP only needs a gain of 1 seat. We currently have 8 toss-up seats, and I think that actually changed that today. We moved Ohio to lean Republican. There's really 7, but you can see 4 of those are Democratic seats. They are all the incumbents. It's Kelly in Arizona, Cortez Masto in Nevada, Raphael Warnock in Georgia, and Maggie Hassan in New Hampshire. And the 4 Republican seats are, 3 of them are open, right? Ohio, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina, and then you have Ron Johnson in Wisconsin, who is in a very, very tight race there. A couple of leans down. We don't have a lot of data on Colorado. There was a poll that showed Patty Murray only up 3 points, and we had a poll the other day showing her up like 10 or so. So I think that leads about 6. So I think she's on the safe side. Marco Rubio's in a tighter race than he would have liked, but he is leading in all the polls there. So the upshot here, though, is it looks like projecting a gain of 2 seats, which again is in line with the historical average. Here's where these races stand as of this morning. And actually, a poll came out in Georgia that had Raphael Warnock up 2 points, so that actually is now, he's up by 0.2%. in that race. But nevertheless, so these numbers are real quick politics averages of the latest polls in these races. And you can see they're all very, very tight. Ron Johnson is up less than a percentage point, Adam Laxalt is up a point, Ted Budd, and J.D. Vance, Mark Kelly. So right now you have Laxalt ahead. That would be a pickup for Republicans. And you have Fetterman ahead in his race, which would be a pickup for the Democrats. They cancel each other out. If Raphael Warnock, if he lost in Georgia, that'd be a net gain of 1 for Republicans. What's happened, though, post-Labor Day, is there's been movement to Republicans. Just a few weeks ago, Mandela Barnes was up 3 or 4 points on Ron Johnson. Now he's ahead. The Georgia race has moved in Herschel Walker's favor. Nevada has moved in Laxalt's favor. So all these races have moved toward Republicans in the latest round of polling, including the race in Pennsylvania. Fetterman was leading there. He had some polls showing him up by 6, 8, 10 points. Now it's down to 4 points. That is a race to keep an eye on because I think that that could potentially be one that's going to be very, very close. So here's some quick upshots on political outcomes and what that could mean, both domestically and internationally. Number one, if Republicans take the House, they're absolutely going to do oversight, engage their oversight function. They will absolutely put some curbs on spending. It's one of their big things that they've been talking about. Potentially even impeachment proceedings against Joe Biden. They've got some people who want to do that. If they take control of the Senate, they will put the brakes on Biden's judges, get control of the Judiciary Committee, and use reconciliation to pass whatever legislation they can, which Joe Biden would then probably veto. So, long and the short of it is, even if Republicans win both chambers, they will have the same problem Democrats have had for the last 2 years. Margins that are so small to be basically unmanageable. It's going to be hard for them to get anything done legislatively in 2 years if they have the small margins with the Democratic president. I was going to talk about 2024, but I think I'm out of time. So with that, I want to thank you all. I know that was a lot. It was very fast. Thank you all.